One of the things that I believe Eric talked about is how do we make that system more understandable and in common language? You know, being able to communicate to parents and caregivers and families, because in today's society, families mean much more than just the parents, right? The biological parents. And so how do we make the system more understandable and transparent for families to understand it, but more importantly, be able to, and I know Russ has worked on this in Columbus City Schools, being able to, having parents and family members and caregivers empowered to use the information from the assessments and the information from their teachers to truly help their young person grow and develop. Because again, as Russ said, it's all about the growth. How can we take that student or that scholar from point A to point Z so that they will be successful in life? And having assessments and knowing where they are in that growth and development is very, very important. But having a support system of caregivers and family members who understand that and can help them understand those results and help them identify the pathway forward is absolutely critical.
Thanks, John. Chad?
Yeah. All right. So, good morning, everybody. You don't have to say it again. You've said it a few times. So, the climate for assessment and accountability. I guess I would start by saying something, and if you remember one thing, you need to remember this. This is going to surprise a lot of people. Neither testing nor accountability is popular. I mean, who knew, right? I mean, you sit down for a few hours, and then 2 months later, you get back results, and it's not popular. I have no idea why. No, seriously, over the last 5 years ago, probably, if you rewound in Ohio, Ohio was impacted, like much of the nation, by a strong move against standardized testing itself, the entire assessment system. In many states, there were large opt-out movements, but we're looking at Ohio and we're looking at today. And largely, a lot of that heat that was generated for many good reasons and some other reasons. There's a variety of reasons people were frustrated. A lot of that heat has dissipated. And partly that is because of some changes Ohio made. As these gentlemen, I'm sure, will tell you, Ohio's assessment system and accountability system is not perfect. But I would hope everyone would also agree it's much better than it was 5 years ago. About 3 years ago, we had a major redo of the state report card. It's not perfect. I don't think these instruments will ever be perfect. But student growth is a much larger percentage of the state report card than ever before. Is it the right amount? I don't know. We advocated for it to be even higher because as you're looking at it, the progress we're making really, really matters. A test or a measure of its success, while some states are still fighting related to getting students to take the annual assessment, and it's required, but if you're not there on testing day, there's required and there's required, right? I mean, if people don't take it. In Ohio, more than 98% of students took it. Even the first year after COVID, 2021, because state tests didn't happen in 2020, in that first school year back, 93.7% of Ohio students took the test. So it's not popular, but it is very much accepted as part of the schooling framework in Ohio. And in surveys, parents, while sometimes they express frustrations with the testing process, in general, when they see them and in focus groups, they like the information provided by both the state report card and the student score reports. We need to do better. We need to make it more understandable. Great points made by the gentleman over here. But yeah, that's sort of how I would characterize the current state of assessments and accountability.
Thanks, Chad. So I want to stay with you. We're talking about demystifying. What is the purpose of the statewide test that students take and the ratings that the schools receive?
Yeah, so what you're going to hear is my opinion. I'm sure every person in this room will have their own. If I do a decent job, maybe I'll make you think about it a little bit differently, maybe than you came in the room thinking of it. So first and foremost, for me, the most important thing the state assessment system does is gives parents an objective measure of their child's performance against state standards, against the expectations. If my student's in 4th grade, taking the math test, how well does he or she know 4th grade math? And that is at a time when all across the country, it's not an Ohio phenomenon, when almost every report card is coming back with all A's and B's, you would think, wow, that's fantastic. Yet in the state assessment in Ohio, depending on the grade level and the subject, 50 to 70%, somewhere in there, are proficient. But moms and dads are seeing A's and B's. That's a signal, but it isn't aligned with whether their student demonstrated and met the state's expectations for 4th grade math too often. So that is, to me, the most important thing, and it's often not talked about. Other purposes, and I'll go quickly through these, for parents and community as a whole, I think it gives a better understanding of a school's strength and weaknesses. What does the school, where is it knocking it out of the park? Where should we be having conversations with the school leadership or teachers about doing better? And also student group information, whether it's a student with a disability, a student of color, an economically disadvantaged student. We have that data to show how various student groups are doing on the state assessment. And there should be tough questions asked. If students that look like your student are not doing well, that's when we have to roll up the sleeves and figure out how to do that better. For school leaders, these gentlemen can both answer that better. I would only say that it does allow school leaders to identify strengths and weaknesses, but how well or how much it's used is dependent upon the school leader themselves. For policymakers, it gives a broad view, these would be state legislators, a broad view of school and student group performance, and should help them identify where more resources are needed. Ohio funds economically disadvantaged students at a higher rate. Maybe it should be even higher than it is. But we try to send more resources where we know students need more supports to reach their full potential. And this can help shine a light on that and see if we're making progress toward achieving that goal or not. And finally, for states, the state assessment, and this is what probably where most people start and end the analysis, is it allows states to meet the federal requirements to identify schools in need of extra supports.
Thanks, Chad. All right, Russ, so it's just us with an audience of maybe 100. But can you tell us, how are the tests and the ratings used, right? You're from Columbus, so again, it's just us.
So the challenge I have with state report card, I think Eric outlined very well. It's not transparent. So I think it's hard for it to be used that way. We all know that there's been a change in the state standards and expectation, and that bar went up significantly over time. And I don't know that our parents necessarily understand that shift and what that means. And often are confused by that change in expectation and change in learning with it. So I don't know how well our families are able to utilize the resources that come from the state. My other challenge on that is they come too late. So, test results came out at the very end of the school year. Well, instruction's over. I'm much more in favor of, hey, can we keep kids informed along the way? Can we keep families informed along the way? While I still, as a parent, have an opportunity to participate and make a change during the course of the year, or have a dialogue with my teacher about my students' performance. So for me, I think the more valuable assessments are the ones that are district administered, that measure growth within the year, that we can progress monitor. Sorry, I know it's supposed to be between the two of us. But that allow us to monitor whether or not kids are growing within the year, and to let parents know whether or not we're closing gaps within the year. Because let's be honest, if you look at the state accountability model, you can rank school systems based on the level of income of parents. I mean, that's just the reality of it. On the other hand, if we focus on growth, and again, not just typical growth, the growth that's necessary to close gaps, then we can acknowledge schools that are doing really good work. We can have parents engaged with understanding what their students are doing so that they can help at home. We can involve the larger community, because when I think about Columbus, I think about the larger community and how the larger community can participate with us. We serve the community, we serve our students in the community. We can't do it alone. There are community agencies, the Boys and Girls Club, Children's Hospital, et cetera, all that are engaged with us to help get this work done. The assessments that occur during the course of the year, way more valuable to me. And oh, by the way, I can predict with 85 to 90% accuracy the proficiency rate at the end of the year. So why are we giving that test at the end of the year? I already know what it's going to say. It's a complete waste of time at that point. So that's...
Thank you. So, John, I'd like to bring you in here to talk a bit about the impact of the assessments and accountability systems on the mental health of children and their families.
Thank you for that question, because as you can tell, I'm really, really focused on our children and on our young people. And all of us are. But a lot of our discussion thus far has been about the adults, about the parents, about the caregivers, about the administrators, the teachers, the educators. And so thank you for that question about our young people. And I'm worried about our young people, and I've always been worried about our young people's mental health when it comes to the assessment and accountability system, because as the video kind of pointed out, once the results come back and I didn't do well, how prepared are we to lift that scholar back up again, and to encourage them and to instill in them that this is just a snapshot. It doesn't dictate your entire life. Because many a times, and I've seen this in my own household, and I've seen it as being an educator for 20-something years, dealing with family members and with scholars who are trying to deal with this reality that they may have not done well, and we have to be able to understand the level of trauma that our young people are experiencing from this current system that we have. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not against assessments, right? We have to be able to measure the growth and development of our young people, but we also have to have a system that's fair to them and allows them to demonstrate the skills and the abilities that they have, and truly demonstrate those skills and abilities so that they are encouraged, right? And they feel good about themselves. My concern is that the current assessment and accountability system doesn't create that for many young people. It does quite the opposite, and it's a traumatizing experience for them to go through it.
Thank you. So, Chad, this question is for you. I think there's a bit of tension between the purpose of the test, and whether we should even be looking at it at an individual student level or we should be looking at it at the aggregate. So can you talk a bit about what the biggest misconceptions are around assessment and accountability?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, biggest misconception one, and you've heard it a little bit today, and that is the state assessment is not intended to inform day-to-day instruction. School districts like Columbus, like Cleveland, they have really good assessments they use to impact that. It is an end-of-the-year assessment. It's much like an annual physical. When I go to the doctor, he tells me I need to lose a little weight. He lets me know, honestly, when I go at the end of the year, he takes my blood pressure, does some blood work, and gives me an assessment of sort of where I am, what I can improve on, and that. Now, that is, and it takes me a couple weeks to get back the results of the blood work. I don't know it right away. The number one misconception is that this test was ever intended to drive day-to-day instruction. It's not. Now, at the end of the year, when the school gets the results in June, if no student in 4th grade learned fractions, that's probably a decision for school leadership to look at and say, you know what? We've got 50 scholars here in our 2 4th grade classrooms, and no one can do what we expect them to do. So how do we do it differently next year? And how do you help those students who just moved to 5th grade? Make sure you solidify that so they are ready for algebra going into 9th grade. So that's the number one misconception. Other ones, and I'll move more quickly through them, is no one ever loses money as a result, meaning school districts, as a result of performing poorly on the state assessment. A lot of people will think, well, if we do poorly, we're going to get less money. No, that doesn't happen. In fact, if you're identified for additional federal supports, you actually share in a part of additional Title I funds that come to the school, as it should be, because we want to make sure the resources are where they need to be to help all students reach their potential. Let's see. We've heard a little bit about this, and you know, Dr. Stanford is really committed to kids' mental health and has been for his entire career. And he's right that students are feeling anxious and nervous and impacted by the test. But here's the thing, they shouldn't be. Certainly not by the test itself. No student will be withheld a grade now that we've made some changes to 3rd grade reading in Ohio. You can get a high school diploma without showing competence in math and English. That's a debate for a different discussion, whether that's a good idea, but you can. There are non-test-based ways to achieve that. So if you're a student, many times students are mirroring the tension that's in the system that adults are showing them. And so let's be more supportive of our students. And the last anecdote with that is my daughter, and I do state policy and education. My daughter one morning, I've got 3 kids, right? They're all different. One of them's the cheerful one. You wake her up and she's like, yeah, let's go, Dad. And so one day, it was in probably 7th grade, and she woke up and something was wrong. And I said, what's going on, Anna? And she said, well, we have state assessments today. I'm like, it's fine, you'll do great. I believe in you, go forth, do it. You got a good night's sleep, we'll get you a good breakfast, go after it. And she's like, but my teacher told me that if I don't do well, I won't advance to the next grade. And I'm like, that's not true. I can tell you for sure that is not true. And you know, and it isn't in Ohio. And that's something we need to make sure we create an environment to reduce the stress on students, because they shouldn't be feeling it. But at the same time, we need the information about whether and by the way, the state tests don't tell you everything about a student, but they do tell you whether they can read and do math on grade level. And that's what they're for.
All right, thanks, Chad. So we're talking about all of this within the context of education reform. You know, at the very beginning, even about the elementary and secondary education act that was signed as part of civil rights legislation. What are the challenges related to education reform in our current assessment and accountability system? Russ, I'll start with you.
So one of the challenges that I see, again, is transparency. I think Eric laid it out pretty well. The state report card is pretty hard to understand and not something that is easily consumable by parents. And ultimately, you know, it reduces to a star rating. And folks are supposed to make some inference about the quality of the school from a star rating. I'm not sure that it communicates whether or not a school's good or not. You know, when I think about education and a broader sort of desire for education, I think about, you know, what do we want our students to become when they graduate? What opportunities do we want to open for them? One of the challenges that I have with our current assessment and accountability system is it tends to put everybody through the same funnel. You know, we're all measured the same way, we have the same expectations. It doesn't allow for kids to sort of demonstrate the variety of talents that they have or the different ways that they could do. The other thing that, just tying back to accountability, I'm not opposed to accountability. I'm not opposed to using some sort of assessment to benchmark and communicate to the community about students' progress. There are just far more efficient ways to do it. Far more efficient ways to do it. There was a mention about NAEP before. If the unit of measurement that we're trying to communicate about is a school, then let's do a sampling model that lets us talk about schools. It doesn't require assessing every student or communicating results about every student. Again, I think that it's far better to have those things woven into the instructional process based on formative instructional practices, formative assessment within the instructional practices. So when the results come at the end of the year, you're not surprised if a student doesn't know how to do fractions. You already knew that. It's not a surprise. We don't need the end of year assessment to tell us that. In a way that's disconnected from the rest of instruction. So that to me is one of the biggest challenges. I think we're not, the other piece that we haven't talked about, and this goes back to NCLB, is that this type of measurement has narrowed the curriculum in many places, particularly in urban settings. It tends to narrow the curriculum. We look at reading and math. It comes at the expense of civics, arts, et cetera. The things that often keep kids engaged, the things that are meaningful. And, last year, we happened to be at the Aspen Institute. One of the things we were talking about is the importance of developing good citizens. That requires a much deeper conversation. That requires a good understanding of history. It requires, again, those critical thinking skills. It requires the ability to interact and have empathy with others, soft skills. So when I think of what a good school is, I think of a school that, again, takes care of the whole child. And often our kids come with a lot. And so what does it mean, again, to partner with the community, to wrap ourselves around our kids to ensure their success as they move forward? So my challenge, frankly, with the accountability model is it tends to narrow things. The footprint for the assessment that we require right now is far too large and inefficient for the task. We could do it in a much more efficient fashion.
Thank you. So this conversation is obviously about looking at what the current system is, but also imagining what can be. And so, John, I'd like you to share with us, what are the conditions that are necessary for deeper engagement and understanding of assessment and accountability among all of the stakeholders that are assembled here?
Well, I think what's really, really needed is for us to have better communication and better outreach, with the community about the testing and accountability system. As the title of this panel is, demystifying the whole system as a whole, and as a part of that process of demystifying the system, identifying the strengths and weaknesses of that system. Right? Eric did a wonderful job, I think, of kind of giving an overview of what are some of the strengths and what are some of the weaknesses of that system. And so being able to take that type of information, putting it into an easy, understandable, framework for the community to understand it, and then having sessions, having conferences like this, going to those grassroots organizations and giving them, one-pagers with bullet-pointed information to give to them to help them better understand it. And then also identifying those experts within the community that can help them dig deeper into that information from that one-pager, because that one-pager should hopefully create questions and then be able, and so being able to connect with those who have answers to those questions, I think would be very, very helpful.
And so let's say that this panel is that one pager. I'd like to turn it over to our audience for questions that you may have. And we have a mic here. So if you could come up to the mic.
Good morning still. My name is Pam Scott, and I'm on the Shaker School Board. I've also worked in the Cleveland schools under Eric's leadership, and one of the things I think we forget is that the state assessment is not for students. It's to see if teachers are teaching. So all of that pressure we have placed on our students as opposed to looking at the teachers. Our state of schools right now, teachers are driving our results and are driving our decisions. So we need to make sure that teachers are held accountable, school districts are held accountable, and that students and families are not receiving that pressure. So what is your recommendation for that?
Is it a question for a specific panelist or for all three?
I'm interested in, is it Chad? I'm interested in all three, but I'm interested in your response, because when the question was asked about what is the purpose of state assessment, we know that when No Child Left Behind was created, it was created to see if teachers were actually teaching. And schools are actually providing the supports for marginalized communities. So if that's the purpose of the assessment, and we know that that's driven by teacher performance, what is your response to making sure that we hold teachers accountable and debunk the thought that Johnny can't read because Johnny didn't come to school and sit in a seat for 120 hours? And looking at Johnny can't read because the teacher is not engaging him, not giving him relevant content, not giving, the credence of that there's a cultural difference. So what is your response to holding teachers accountable as opposed to putting the pressure on students and families?
Thank you for the question. Please. It's great they start off with the easy questions, and then she has a choice and she chooses me. So thank you. So Ohio, in its Race to the Top application, which was sort of in between No Child Left Behind and ESSA in the early 2010s, tried to instill a comprehensive state-defined teacher evaluation system. And it largely failed. And it failed in most states around the country. There are a couple of exceptions, maybe Tennessee, that seem to get it right and get buy-in, and it actually created some sort of functional system. In Ohio, 97% of teachers were, "You're doing great." So here's the thing. Teachers are incredible. We're all sitting here and can look back and see some really fantastic teachers. If you're like me, I also had a couple of teachers that were less than fantastic, right? And the system that's in place has done a really, really poor job. If you say that, look, if 97% of teachers are amazing, then it is the highest of any profession ever. How many of you think, I mentioned doctors earlier, are 97% of doctors great? No, and we could go down the list of professions. We have a really hard time creating any sort of accountability system that works. And so because I'm not in a school setting, and I will not put words in their mouth, I'm not saying it for them, but what I've heard from others, not them, is that, look, if I'm giving a teacher evaluation and there's a teacher that's struggling, but they've been here 10 years, they're on a continuing contract, there's not much I can do. I can give them a bad rating, but they have a lot of friends and I'm the principal. It's really hard. I'm looking at 1, 2, 3-year process with lots of counseling and lots of interventions and just a real pain in the tush while you're busy trying to be the instructional leader for your school. That's hard. We've created a system where the very few, and I will say very few teachers that are not up to speed, up to snuff, it's almost impossible to exit them. And it's easier to try to not have the most challenged students go to them, to try to smooth over it. And so I do not have a full solution for that. But what you're saying is exactly right. We need to be able to hold two thoughts in our mind. Teachers are amazing and do an incredibly honorable job, but not all of them are incredible. It's too hard for everybody to be good at. And until we honestly deal with that, we're going to keep trying to answer your question. And you're right, the pressure shouldn't be on moms and dads and students.
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to jump in on this because, the question was very difficult, but also very interesting in the premise of the question, right? That the assessment and accountability system was created to hold teachers accountable, right? And the question I have is, shouldn't it be about our students, our scholars, and what we are doing to uplift them and to grow and develop them? And how does the assessment do that, right? And because when you look at the research about what makes or what produces high achievement with our scholars, and what are those things that create the type of learning environment for our scholars to excel, has nothing to do with testing and accountability. It has all to do about the culture. It has to do about the relationships that is being built in the classroom, and it has to do with the level of expertise and command of the content by the teacher, and being able to deliver that content effectively and efficiently with the number of students that they have in the classroom. None of that is measured by the assessment and accountability system that we have. And so there's a disconnect with the foundation that we have built in this country around testing and accountability with the type of things we're trying to use it for.
So adding to that, because I think that's a really great point, going back to my annual physical analogy, going and taking that physical doesn't make me healthier. It shows me how well I did that last year and whether I am healthy or where I need to improve. And so you're right, assessment and accountability, you know it's coming. It can help you. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I'm getting ready to go to the doctor, that last month before, I'm eating a little bit better. I'm stepping on the scale, hoping, okay, what we need to do is make sure over the course of a year, I'd be more successful if I did it over the course of a year to put myself in shape. But the physical, just like the assessment, doesn't make you healthier. It doesn't make you more achieving. But if you learn from that and you have your nose to the grindstone, the following year when you go back, hopefully it's better.
Real quickly though,
And we
because I
do
agree
have
with
another
you.